Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I will be sharing with you guys my June wrap-up. So the month is not quite over as of yet. Today it is the 27th of June, so I still have a few days to continue reading. However, I know that the book that I'm currently working on, which is The Stand by Stephen King, I am not going to be finishing by the end of the month, but because I do still have a few days left to read it, I do want to make sure I include those pages within like my stats for the month. But I know I'm not going to finish the book by any means over the course of the month. So let's get into exactly what my stats were otherwise. So during the month, I had 2 readathons that happened. The entire month was dedicated to the House Cupathon, which is a readathon I host with 3 of my really great friends that I've made on YouTube, Adri, Liv, and Ara. And it was so fun, but I feel like I just didn't read nearly as much as I had wanted to in the month because I kind of, in the last couple weeks, I've hit a bit of a reading slump. And the other readathon I participated in was the Feel Goodathon, which was hosted by one of my friends, Jess, and a few other people. And that was going on in the first 2 weeks of the month. I did not complete all of the prompts for it, but I still had a really fun time. And one of the books that I read this month was buddy reading with my friend Jess, and I had such a great time with it, reading it with her and kind of talking about what the book meant to us in a lot of different ways, being from small towns like the story is talking about. So out of all the books I read this month, I read 5 physical books, no ebooks, and 2 audiobooks, and 6 of the 7 books I completed this month were from my personal library, and only 1 book I read this month was borrowed. So to start off the month, the first thing I completed in the month of June was an audiobook that I had picked up in the end of May, so it didn't count for anything with the House Cupathon, but it was Salt of the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. I loved this book. This was the only book I ended up actually borrowing too. I had borrowed it from my library. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars because I really like Ruta Sepetys' writing and the way that she crafts her stories around these historical moments, because they're very impactful, but they also talk about the event that happened in a way that I think is a little bit more digestible to a lot of people, because otherwise learning about the particular sinking of this ship would be difficult for, I think, some people to understand in a nonfiction sense. Salt of the Sea is a historically fictionalized story of the sinking of the Gustav Wilhelm, which is a ship that was basically carrying a bunch of people during World War II from the eastern part of Europe to someplace safer that they could actually, live their lives without persecution. But unfortunately, the ship was attacked by Soviet U-boats, I believe. And the sinking of the ship resulted in the loss of 9,000 lives, 5,000 of them being very young children. The story is essentially surrounding around several different people and their experiences with getting to the ship and trying to basically make their way away from their home lives because they are literally being persecuted. There is one person who is considered to be a spy who is trying to make his way through the ship to end up taking information off to the English so that they can use that information in the war. And there is one character who is a German Nazi who is trying to live his life on the ship and do what he can to prove that he is a soldier that is worthy of people's time. I think that one of my things I love the most about Ruta Sepetys is just her ability to tell a story with very well done information about a historical event. It's very clear she does her research, and it makes me really love what she does, because I think that a lot of times if you write historical fiction, you have to know what you're writing on. And it's clear that with this one and another book I read by her, Out of the Easy, that she does her research so well and creates a story around these time periods so well that she's now going to be one of my auto-buy historical fiction authors. The next book I read was another audiobook. This one, though, I had personally, and that was Tell Me Lies by J.P. Pomer. This is a psychological thriller, and I really liked this one a lot. This was the first book I completed for the House Cupathon, which was for my Mandrake's prompt, which is to read an audiobook. And I liked this one, but I felt like the end of it was a little rushed because the audiobook itself was very short. It was really interesting because the story focuses around a woman who is a psychologist. She works with a few different kinds of people, and she basically knows that a lot of her patients will likely lie to her. And unfortunately, one of them she suspects is stalking her and is actually trying to cause harm to her and her family. And it's kind of up to her to figure out who that is and why they're doing this. It's really thrilling. It was very fast paced and I liked it a lot, but I think that the end of the story was a little rushed compared to I think what I had expected of it. First book I read physically that I completed was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This was my buddy read with Jess for the Feel Good-a-thon, and was also a book that I was willing to give a second chance because I wasn't sure the first time I read it how much I really enjoyed it. This was counting for then House Cup-a-thon for the Fox prompt, which was a second chance read. The issue I had with it when I first read it was that I thought that there were some things that seemed a little on the extreme side, that there were some events that happened that I didn't really think would be possible, but there were so many things in this story that I related to so much and had really been able to understand and empathize with because they were things I had kind of experienced growing up, or at least the sentiment of what these different events were happening were things I had experienced growing up. For those of you that don't know, Little Fires Everywhere is basically about a small town that apparently is actually a real town in Ohio that is basically called Shakers Heights. And it's a community that is very cut and dry. There's rules. It's a community that everybody does the same thing. The houses look the same. There are regulations that need to be followed in order for the place to live in harmony. I can't remember exactly what the phrase is that they call it, but it's very similar actually to the real life neighborhood that is in this part of Ohio. And the story follows basically a few different kinds of people, but really the main story that gets involved is that there is a Chinese American baby that is being adopted into an English family, and the mother of that child is basically in a spot where she's able to take care of the child. She doesn't feel like she needs to be away from the child anymore and wants to take her back. And there's this big kerfuffle in the town of who really has the right to raise that child, whether it's the birth mother or the adoptive family that had basically given her a good life for the last year and had proven to be very good parents. The interesting thing about this was I actually think loved it more than I did the first time. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, and I truly loved it the second time around. As you can see from all of my tabs, like I annotated this thing to filth because I loved it so much. And Jess and I really had a lot of interesting conversations about some of the things that happened in this book in terms of the kind of inherent racism that there is in this town, even though a lot of people say that they aren't racist. It's very much those things where it's like, I'm not racist because I have friends that are Asian or friends that are Black, but it's clear that there's a lot of inherent racism. And you see that not only in the adults, but in the teenagers as well, because they've grown up with these things and these ideas. And there's a lot of talk about things like this whole adoption thing going on, whether or not the birth mother has a right to have the child now that she's kind of taken some time to get things kind of figured out, or if the family that is in the process of adopting her should have her because they've had her for the last year and have proven to be very good parents. And there's a lot that goes on too about the talk about, you know, the cultural issue that there is with adopting a culturally different child, a child of a different race. And there's so many great conversations that we had about this, and Jess and I both ended up loving it very, very much. And I'm really glad I got to do a buddy read with Jess because she is a YouTuber I've been following for a long time that I was really, really hoping I could get in contact with and become very good friends with. And I think that that is the case. That happened very easily with this book and was a great way for me to get to know her. And we felt that we both were validated in a lot of ways with the small town element involved with it because, like I said, there were a lot of things that kind of popped up in this that we both had experienced living in small towns in the past. The next book I completed was the required reading for the House Cup-a-thon, which was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling. And we have come out with a statement within our Discord community about this thing about J.K. Rowling. Now, I don't think I'm going to be talking about really much about this series or J.K. Rowling in general. I had talked about it briefly in some of the vlogs I did over the course of the month. My point being that basically I am not really purchasing anything that has to do with her. I am going to be keeping the things I do have because they were gifts to me. And I do want these books by themselves. I still have a lot of love for them, even if I don't have love for the author anymore. I will no longer be supporting her. I'm no longer buying things that are Harry Potter related because I know that that money will somehow go back to her, and I do not want to support her in that way. But I do have still a lot of love for these books, regardless of who wrote them. And I think that it's important that these books still remain a part of my life because they did shape a lot of what my reading is today. So like I said, this was the required reading for the House Cupathon. I ended up also, I think, using it for the Tom Riddle's journal prompt, which was to read an author that uses their initials or a pen name. And I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. I don't feel like I really need to go into this one. Still love this one, I think, as much as I did the last time I had read it about a couple years ago. The Chamber of Secrets also completed prompts for the Feel Good-a-thon, which were to read a short book, continue or finish a series, and read a book with my favorite trope, which is Magic School. The next book I read was actually one of my most disappointing reads so far this year, and that was the first book in the Thirst series by Christopher Pike, The Last Vampire. I had a whole review video talking about this that I'll leave down in the description, so I won't go too much more into it now, but I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I really disliked it. I feel like this is going to be one of those series rereads that I'm actually going to like this series much, much less than I did when I was first in high school, because I think that I've seen so far in the first book that there are many, many issues that have not been addressed and I think need to be addressed now, considering that these books are now going on 30 years old, and there's a lot of issues that need to be discussed in terms of some of the writing and some of the things that the characters do that I think would not really hold up well anymore. Thirst was for my Burrow and Howler prompts for the House Cupathon. The Burrow for a cozy read because I remember I have very fond memories of this series when I was in high school, and the Howler because this is the story that it basically is about a character who has to come to the consequences of her actions and atone for what they've done. For Feel Good-a-thon, this also completed the reread prompt. Next book I completed was Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This was for the House Cupathon, completing my Polyjuice Potion prompt, which was to read a book in some kind of mixed media format or non-traditional format, and Following the Spiders, which was to read a hyped book. For Feel Good-a-thon, this was one of the host favorites and was for the High Hopes prompt. I gave this one surprisingly a 4 out of 5 stars. I think I enjoyed it more than I expected I did, but there were some issues I had over the course of the book. I didn't necessarily get as involved with it as I thought I would. I had a lot of questions regarding the backstory that was involved with it, but I did hear from a lot of people saying that the other books in the series do play more on the backstory and why exactly Katie and Ezra, who are the main characters, had to leave their planet in order to protect themselves from this incoming group called Bitech. And it's a lot of questions though that I had wished were answered in the first book, but I am excited to read the other ones because I do know now that those questions should be answered in either Gemina or Obsidio. And the last book I completed this month was My Enemy's Cradle by Sarah Young. This was completing prompts for the House Cupathon specifically because I did not get to this one in the time of the Feel Good-a-thon, but this one completed my Denoming the Garden prompt for House Cupathon, which was to read a book I was thinking about unhauling, and the Death Day Party prompt, which was to read a book that I had kind of forgotten that I had. This one I was kind of iffy with. I feel like it was good, but it was definitely something I don't think I would reread, but is a pretty interesting look at another side of World War II that it doesn't really get talked about, I think, a lot, which is the idea of women that have German babies or have babies by soldiers from the Nazi side. This basically follows a young woman named Surla, who her cousin ends up getting pregnant and then dying because her cousin's boyfriend is a soldier with the Nazis and he goes off, and her cousin believes that she's been left alone with the baby, that she's not going to be able to take care of it, and is going to be sent off to what's called a Lebensborn, or a maternity home for women that are having German soldier babies. And before she even leaves to do that, Surla's cousin Annika ends up killing herself through a botched abortion. And because of that, her aunt and uncle send Surla away in Annika's place to basically make it so that they think Annika is still there. And Surla is also going there because Surla is half Jewish. And although she looks like her cousin Annika with her blonde hair and blue eyes and doesn't really have many hints of being Jewish, Surla's aunt and uncle believe that she's still at risk, and so they also think that taking Annika's place in the Lebensborn is going to keep her safe and keep her from being persecuted by the Nazis. I didn't really have so many issues with this as I thought I would going into the story. It definitely paints a picture of something that I didn't really know was even a thing within the World War II time, Nazi Germany regime, but it makes sense considering that there's this whole idea during Hitler's reign of the idea of the master race, and this kind of goes more into that in how they were essentially dealing with women that were having German babies. I didn't have really any issues with it per se. I just don't think I liked this book as much as I had wanted to. I feel like this book really put me in a bit of a reading slump, and at the time I also wasn't mentally in the best place with everything going on in the world, and this just didn't help. And I think it was part of the reason why I got into a reading slump here in the last couple weeks of the month. I liked it. I didn't necessarily have any issues with it, but it wasn't one of my favorite stories. I gave it a 3-star, but I think that this is something I will never read again, and so I will be unhauling it because I just don't see a point in picking it back up again. I had my time with it. I kind of liked it. I would recommend it if you're looking for World War II historical fiction stories, because this goes into an area that most people don't talk about, but it's just not something I'll ever read again. So there you guys go. Those are all the books I completed this month in June. I do have, like I said, one other book that I am probably not going to finish by the end of the month. Let me know how you guys did with the readathon, if you joined the House Cupathon, if you did feel good-a-thon, how you did, how you felt like your reading has gone this past month, and what you are planning on reading in the next month. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.